How do you see the relationship between those two men?
When it comes to the art of the deal, it's actually Putin, not Trump, who really seems to be the current master of that process. Putin is extremely good at playing Trump. The best way to save Ukraine's nationhood is to stop the bloody war. There are people who have said right from the beginning of the war, Ukraine needs to cut off Donbass like a gangrenous limb. Nothing good will ever come from Donbass. Like, why are we even fighting about it? Just let it go. It's just, Ukraine is still Ukraine without Donbass.
Are we witnessing Europe's betrayal of Ukraine, do you think?
Europe is the second largest importer of Russian gas in the world after China. So, please, spare me your hypocrisy and, shove your sanctions packages where the sun doesn't shine.
If you've ever started your own business, you'll know just how tricky and time-consuming it can be. It's a bit like being a writer. There can be late nights, a never-ending to-do list, and responsibilities that, no matter what, fall squarely on you. Luckily, if you're starting a business or already have one, you can easily lighten the load and get all the support you need with Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform launching millions of businesses around the world, from household names like Mattel and Gymshark to brands that are just getting started. It really is a game changer. The best thing about Shopify is how easy it makes getting started, regardless of your business experience. It helps you build a beautiful online store that's perfectly tailored to your brand, with hundreds of ready-to-use templates. You don't need any design experience at all. Shopify also comes with plenty of helpful AI tools. This can sharpen up every aspect of your business, like writing headlines and product descriptions, and even improving your photography. Of course, none of this is much good unless you get the word out there, and here Shopify has your back too. You can easily create email and social media campaigns so your brand will be seen wherever your future customers are scrolling. Along with all of this, Shopify offers expert advice in all things business. Any questions you have, from shipping to returns, it's here to help with just about everything. So if you're ready to sell, then you're ready for Shopify. Turn your big business idea into cash with Shopify on your side. Sign up for your £1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.co.uk/Brendan. Go to shopify.co.uk/Brendan to start selling today. Shopify.co.uk/Brendan. Hello, welcome back to the Brendan O'Neill Show with me, Brendan O'Neill, and my special guest this week, Owen Matthews. Owen, welcome to the show.
Great pleasure.
It's great to have you on. I've been reading your commentary on Ukraine and Russia for the past 3 years and finding it an indispensable guide to a part of the world that I am very much a lay person on. So it's brilliant to be able to read your stuff and to have you on to talk about some of this stuff, especially in the week in which a lot has happened. We think a lot has happened. It's hard to figure it out. But I guess I want to kick off by asking you where you think things stand. So we've had the Alaska meeting between Trump and Putin, quite controversial. We've had the gathering in Washington, D.C. of Trump, Zelensky, and some of the heads of state of Europe. Big things, big events, caught the world's attention for sure. It's not clear that a ceasefire has come out of it. It's not clear that any kind of deal is in the making. It's not clear that what exactly the consequences will be. But how important do you think these events were? Where do you think we currently stand in relation to this dreadful conflict?
Well, I think it's clear that the ceasefire is not going to happen. That's one of the things that's been substantial. One of the few things that's been actually substantial in this negotiation between Trump and Putin, and that is that Putin has just exploded Trump's desire to strike a ceasefire rather than a big sort of Mundo peace deal. It's the peace deal that Putin wants because it's the peace deal that gives Putin time. But the bottom line, I think, for these talks, what we need to not lose sight of is peace is definitely closer than it was before Trump started on this. And I got to say, I've been picked up by some readers for being sort of sarcastic about Donald Trump. We got to give him his due. I have to say that he is pushing things forward in a way that the Europeans couldn't and wouldn't. And it's kind of highly ironic, in fact, to witness the spectacle of European leaders sitting around a table, so falling over themselves to praise Trump for opening a dialogue with Putin, who they themselves had basically shunned and treated as a pariah, refused to speak to for 3 years. So he's moving forward, as Trump was caught saying on a hot mic to his European guests in the White House, um, uh, he believes that Trump wants to do a deal. It's crazy, says Trump. It's not crazy at all. Putin definitely wants to do a deal. The part that Trump, I think, maybe hasn't caught up with is that Putin wants to do a deal on his own terms. So, in that sense, Emmanuel Macron is right. Insofar as he said, in fact, just before his meeting with Trump, he said that he does not believe that Putin wants peace. What he wants is the capitulation of Ukraine. And I think those things are true. Putin wants a deal, and that deal is the capitulation of Ukraine. Now, what remains to be discussed is what does that really mean? And should it be called a capitulation or a peace deal?
Yes. Well, that is the $1 million question. And in relation to Putin and Trump, I did want to ask you, one of the stories about this strange relationship between these two men is that some people will say that Putin is playing Trump like a fiddle, kind of getting what he wants from Trump and seeming to kind of flirt with Trump to a certain extent. And you made the point in one of your pieces that Putin got a lot of what he wanted, even just by going to Alaska. The red carpet treatment, all the bells and whistles, a little bit of fawning from Trump here and there. How realistic is Trump about Putin? Do you think he understands Putin? Does he understand that Putin wants the capitulation of Ukraine? Is that possibly something Trump might get on board with at some point? How do you see the relationship between those two men?
I think you're completely right that Putin is extremely good at playing Trump. I mean, you can see how absolutely precisely there was like a whole Kremlin brain trust that went into the script writing of that, into the choreography of the Alaska summit. It was absolutely brilliant. I mean, in a kind of obviously like Putin-esque evil way, but nonetheless like evilly brilliant. Putin like said, he agreed with Trump on like the Russiagate hoax. He agreed that the war wouldn't have happened if Trump was president.
Yeah.
He agreed that Trump actually, basically won the election, and postal ballots were the culprit. I mean, he just sort of rolled out every single sort of every single sort of sweet talking point that Trump loves to hear. And most of all, he repeated. Putin said 3 times. He says the word business-like relations, and he talked up the other sort of big Trump thing, which is the art of the which the upside, the economic upside. So in that sense, actually, when it comes to the art of the deal, it's actually Putin, not Trump, who really seems to be the current master of that process. And your question was about their relationship. Does Trump understand Putin? I think Putin understands
Oh,
Trump
yeah.
very well. Does Trump understand Putin? I think Putin plays to Trump's sense of the transgressional. He wants to break molds. If Biden hated Trump, if Biden hated Putin, then it kind of makes sense for Trump to sort of break that mold and reverse it and actually reset the relationship with Russia. And that desire by Trump to overturn his predecessor's legacy and do everything different is something that Putin has been very brilliant at exploiting, because one of the great sort of general breakthroughs or strategic breakthroughs or breakthroughs in framing the question that Putin has achieved in this process is to make Ukraine a sort of a footnote, a kind of like sort of parenthetical part of a much larger package of a major strategic reset.
Yeah.
And that, I think, appeals to Trump's vanity. Very much, because not only does Trump, of course, love the pageantry of the imperial presidency, the Air Force One, like sort of the giant planes showing up, on the tarmac, the red carpets, driving around in the beast, like all that sort of pageantry of sort of cosplaying a major sort of international superpower leader. Well, I mean, Trump actually is a major international superpower leader. It's Putin that's doing cosplaying. But anyway, Trump loves that the sort of the trappings of the imperial presidency. And part of being an imperial president is sort of making the big decisions, the big world decisions about things that sound big,
Mm.
which are, for instance, a reset in political and economic relations between Russia and America. When it comes to the nuts and bolts, no one really cares about the nuts and bolts. But actually, there is not that huge an amount of business, like dollars and cents, that America really can do with Russia. But that doesn't matter. The point is, like, sort of the big beautiful deal.
Am I being too favorable if I say that whatever Trump might do in relation to the pageantry and whatever he might say about Putin in public, that in the White House there's a bit more realism about Putin and realism about what he represents? I mean, there does seem to have been a little bit of a shift in the White House's attitude towards him, because they did say that they think he's pushing a little bit of bullshit their way, and they have expressed a little more hostility towards him over the past few months than they might have done previously. Previously, their target was very much Zelensky, as we all saw in that horrible showdown in the Oval Office between Zelensky, Trump, and Vance. Um, Behind the scenes, behind the pageantry, do you think there are wiser minds in the foreign departments in Washington, D.C., who recognize what Putin represents, recognize that what he wants is not ideal, but it may have to happen for certain reasons? Or maybe am I being too favorable by saying that?
No, but it's worth sort of untangling what we're talking about, because yes, there are plenty of smart people who are still in the State Department, not necessarily in the White House, and
Right,
certainly not front and center of
right.
Trump's negotiations. I mean, literally, Steve Witkoff is a real estate lawyer and a golfing buddy who has literally zero experience of diplomacy, and he's the guy that Trump has chosen to send into the room with Putin and his top officials, and actually be front and center of his negotiations with the Kremlin. So clearly there's not much foreign policy expertise there. I mean, in fact, my friend, and maybe yours, Michael Weiss, describes Steve Witkoff as a dim Philby.
Yeah.
But uh, on the other hand, it has to be said, I mean, setting aside sort of Witkoff's gullibilities, or proven gullibility and naivety aside, we have to say that Trump is not quite the useful idiot
Mm,
that Putin maybe originally took him for.
yeah.
And it is important to note that he has said, called out Putin's bullshit. Um, However, I mean, when push comes to shove, what we're really talking about is whether the United States is willing to grapple with the realities of Putin's demands.
Yeah.
And that's kind of an open question, for one simple reason, and this sort of loops back to, do people like Witkoff, does Trump actually understand what Putin is saying? Does he have someone that can interpret those sort of Putin reasonable sounding weasel words into actually what he's talking about? And that's a much bigger question, because what we saw in Washington on Monday was like a big sort of happy, fest of agreement and
Yep.
flattery, and everyone was pretended to be on the same page with what they kind of assumed Putin, what the Europeans had been told by Trump was what Putin said. So it's like sort of slight Chinese whispers. And if you take specific things, I mean, specific, super important things, like Putin's supposed agreement to security guarantees.
Mm,
So, Trump has been saying, and Witkoff and Secretary of State Marco Rubio have all been saying, it's a great breakthrough. Putin's agreed to
yeah.
security to Article 5 security guarantees. Well, actually, and that's been interpreted, by the way, by people like Sir Keir Starmer and France's President Emmanuel Macron to, be a sort of nod to perhaps their sort of weird boots on the ground plan. Like, absolutely nothing of the
No.
sort. So, like, when we listen to when we look at like what the Trump the Kremlin actually says in its official communiques, is like absolutely no agreement to Article 5 security guarantees. That we did not say that. Similarly, just to take another concrete example, the Trump said, "Oh, I'm going off to organize a meeting between Trump and Zelensky. Like, stand by. It's going to happen next couple of weeks." Like, and again, you see the Kremlin's communicate saying like,
Yeah.
"No, sorry, we did not say that either. We didn't say a firm no, but we didn't say a firm yes either." And that's kind of a really big clue to, I think, to how things are going to be going down. Is that actually we have, the. Uh, Trump is sort of assuming and interpreting, and assuming the best or the possible, or putting the best. Put it this way: Trump is putting the best possible interpretation, the most positive and sort of pro-Zelensky, pro-European interpretation on Trump's words, on Putin's words. But actually, whatever Putin may have said in the room, he meant something completely different. So we're just at the beginning of like a giant process of unpacking, and there's like a gigantic sort of pile of mire of detail. And in that mire of detail, there are like a billion devils lurking.
Yeah. I think in one of your pieces, you made the point that, the idea that there is going to be some meeting and handshakes between Putin and Zelensky is just absurd. I mean, firstly, Putin doesn't think that Zelensky is the legitimate ruler of Ukraine. Also, I think Zelensky's government has made it illegal for people to have meetings. It's just not going to happen. I wanted to ask you about, you mentioned the word capitulation earlier on. This is the thing that worries me enormously as someone who supports Ukraine's right to sovereign integrity and obviously opposed Russia's barbarous invasion 3 years ago. What do you think we might be talking about here? We can then talk about whether it's likely to be agreed to by anyone in Ukraine or even anyone in Europe. But what do you think Russia has its eye on? It wants Ukraine, I guess, to cede both the territory that was claimed by Russia prior to the start of this current war, and also the territory it has won since this current war started. Is it just going to ask for all that territory, for the return of Russian language rights and other Russian rights within that territory? Are we talking about a capitulation as large as that, do you think?
Well, if we're talking about what Putin is going to demand, then yes.
Right.
In fact, I just filed a cover story for this week's Spectator, and like literally 3 paragraphs of it is like Putin's demands, like just like Putin's top dozen demands, and like they just get more and more and more and more outrageous. So like in addition to the things you just said, the things you just mentioned, like this completely outrageous and unconscionable demand that Zelensky give up, the entirety of Donetsk Oblast, including the 3 sort of major fortress towns which are Ukraine's major bulwark against further Russian expansion. I mean, that's completely ridiculous ask, and it's sort of extraordinary and extremely revealing that reportedly Trump considers that to be a sort of normal, a reasonable price of peace. It's extraordinary. But yes, there's like a endless shopping list. Yeah, Russian language rights, the restoration of the Russian church, lifting of sanctions, laws. The Kremlin has a very weird obsession about memory and history laws in Ukraine. They're really exercised about the fact that Soviet symbols are illegal and the Soviet heroes have been cancelled, and the statues of Russian literary figures have been torn down. Like for some reason that really bothers the Kremlin. NATO, no further NATO expansion, Ukrainian neutrality being written into the constitution, the whole a potential federalization of Ukraine. There's an endless, gigantic, long list, and we can be sure. I think that Putin will get some of them. Some of them, by the way, are even actually completely aligned with what the European Union has also demanded. For instance, by the way, over Russian language rights, the European Union considers Ukraine's language laws to be discriminatory and against basic European charters. So we can be sure that Putin will get some of those things. He may not get all of those things. He won't get all of those things because Ukraine will not be able to agree. But the bottom line is that there's a gigantic amount of demands that lie far beyond the sort of simplistic terms in which it's so far been discussed, and on a sort of in the room in the White House between the allies. They just stuck to the very simplest thing, which is vague, nebulous security guarantees. But it goes much deeper and it's far more complicated. But crucially, before we get into the weeds of, let's get out of the weeds. We're in the weeds, but let's get out of the weeds of what it is that Putin wants in terms of detail, and just pull back and assume that many of those things are demands that Ukraine will not and cannot accede to. And then the question becomes, WTAF the Europeans going to actually do about that?
Yeah.
Because there will be a train wreck. And it's not really clear what precisely Europe's plan is when that train wreck comes.
That leads me on nicely to my next question, which is, if you look at the kind of happy clappy meeting in Washington, D.C., kind of all smiles and people talking about progress and interesting conversations, et cetera, was that just performative? Was that just for the cameras? Or is there something more sinister going on here where I think you're right, of course, that Putin is unlikely to get absolutely everything he wants, not least because Ukraine cannot concede to all of that. But do you think Europe is on the way to betraying Ukraine? Is it possible that Europe is going to say, look, you put up a good fight. We helped you in a very small way, I would say, over the past few years. But it's time to make a deal, even if it's a deal not to your own liking. Are we witnessing Europe's betrayal of Ukraine? Do you think?
Yeah, no. In fact, I think that language is massively unhelpful and frankly stupid. Because sorry, I didn't mean you're stupid. Yeah, you, Brendan O'Neill, are one of the cleverest people I've ever met or read. No, but that is a stupid argument, and it's made by people who don't really understand the realities of war on the ground. It's very often made by keyboard warriors who consider themselves to be friends of Ukraine. But actually,
Right.
the real bottom line is, if you are a friend of Ukraine, is encouraging Ukraine to just fight on endlessly, is that really the best way forward? I mean, the Russians have a phrase, "Худой мир лучше доброй ссоры." It's like literally a thin, like a bad peace is better than a good war. And people who talk about the betrayal of Ukraine, Boris Johnson is very fond of saying this. We must not betray Ukraine. We must fight on till victory. Like, well, what does that even mean? If we want to defeat Russia, we, the West, we could do that. We could definitely do that. We could start with not importing Russian oil and gas, which Europe does in enormous quantities. Europe, despite its 18 sanctions packages, is responsible for is the second largest importer of Russian gas in the world after China. So, please, like, spare me your hypocrisy and shove your sanctions packages where the sun doesn't shine. Europe has paid over 260 billion euros into Kremlin coffers since February of 2022 in form of payments for oil and gas. Rather than actually sanction gas is not sanctioned by Russian gas is not sanctioned by Europe at all. Russian oil is supposedly price capped, but there's a million workarounds, which are, and most Russian oil is transported in tankers ultimately owned by Europeans. So if you actually really want to help Ukraine, then encourage your governments to actually stop buying Russian oil and gas. Encourage your governments to sanction, to start a trade war against India and China. Take that 10.5% of world oil production that Russia produces off the market. I mean, and then pay, please, like £3 a liter for your gas. That will strangle. That is the cost of strangling Russia economically. You can do it. Please, be my guest. If that is what you want to do, start an economic war that will strangle Putin's oil economy and end the war. That's how you do it. But it's going to be catastrophically painful and cause terrible economic hardship and upheaval in the West. Or you could actually go to war. I mean, you could, we could actually go to war with Ukraine. We could actually like sort of send in troops or deploy our own, deploy our own frontline weapon systems directly. I mean, but no one wants to do that either because guess what? Russia's nuclear armed power. So actually, like, what are we even talking about? It's really important to sort of unpack this with sort of rhetorical bravado, because the bottom line of all of this bravado, particularly when it comes to European leaders and also British leaders, is that the price for those bold words has been paid for in Ukrainians' blood. And calling for victory at the cost of someone else's sacrifice, I don't think is a very friendly act towards Ukraine, to be honest. And I know many people, including those who've worked closely with Zelensky and because they're themselves like allies and indeed personal friends of Zelensky's, who have been arguing for a long time that the only way to save Ukraine is to stop the war, because if the war is not stopped, then there is going to be an absolute sort of cataclysmic. I mean, already it's pretty apocalyptic, but I mean it's whatever the next stage after apocalyptic is. It's cataclysmic worse than apocalyptic. I don't know.
I think so.
Anyway, but it's just going to get worse, and Ukraine's future is going to be sort of absolutely poisoned in the root for generations. And the best way to save Ukraine's nationhood is to stop the bloody war. And there are people, for instance, like Vadim Pristaiko, who was Zelensky's first foreign minister, in fact, and he was then Ukrainian ambassador to London, so you may have come across him in that capacity, but until last year. But but Pristaiko has said right from the beginning of the war, Ukraine needs to cut off Donbass like a gangrenous limb. Nothing good will ever come from Donbass. Like, why are we even fighting about it? Just let it go. It's just, Ukraine is still Ukraine without Donbass. It's 20% of the country. The people of Donbass, I've been there. I mean, I was going to say, like, the people of Donbass who are still in Donbass definitely don't consider themselves Ukrainians. I mean, that's obviously after a process of ethnic cleansing. There are plenty, you'll come across, any number of people from Donbass who say, I am from Donbass. I'm telling you, when we don't feel Russian. But actually, that's sort of a self-selecting group. The people who are here from Donbass obviously do consider themselves Ukrainian. The people who are still there consider themselves not Ukrainian. So, to answer your question, I mean, the betrayal narrative is actually completely false, and I would say, in fact, offensive, because the way to help Ukraine is not to encourage them to commit suicide militarily or economically or politically, because at a certain point, as Ukraine's own chief of military intelligence, Kirill Budanov, incredibly impressive and terrifying guy, warned the Rada back in December in leaked remarks. He predicted that, like, a non-trivial chance of a serious Ukrainian military collapse. If that's what you're aiming for, then, as Trump rather callously, but I think kind of accurately said, then keep fighting and good luck. But things are not going to get better, unfortunately, and no amount of extra European or American weaponry is, I think, going to change that fundamentally, change that dynamic fundamentally from what it is now. They can slow the Russians' advance, but they can't reverse the course of the war.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, myself included, have come to a similar conclusion to the one you've put there, which is that it's a less than desirable situation that Ukraine currently finds itself in, of course, but it seems that some kind of deal is necessary. How much longer can this awful war go on? How many more lives can be sacrificed, in essence? So I think a lot of people, some with regret, some more optimistically, have come to this conclusion that we need a settlement. In relation to that, I wanted to ask you about Zelensky's domestic situation. You said that there are certain things that Putin is demanding that Ukraine could not concede to. What is Zelensky's standing in Ukraine? Is he becoming more unpopular? Are there moves to take the throne from him? Is he in a difficult position domestically that kind of ties his hands? What's his standing there like?
Well, the whole debacle last month, where he tried to move against the anti-corruption agencies that have been reportedly investigating people close to his chief of staff, is a chap called Andrei Yermak, who is, universally blamed, rightly or wrongly. But large swathes of Zelensky's supporters and opponents both claim that Yermak is extraordinarily sort of corrupt and the fount of all the evil that the administration is doing. So it's sort of, the most favorable opinion that you'll hear is Zelensky is good, but his advisors are wicked thieves. Um, the When Zelensky made that move, it was extraordinarily foolish politically, both in relationship to civil society, which is actually very strong in Ukraine, in relationship to his Western backers as well. But it and One of the things that actually was hailed as being like the catalyst for Zelensky doing a gigantic reverse ferret and, immediately ordering Parliament to repeal the law, or rather, pass a new law countermanding the old law, bringing those anti-corruption agencies under his control. One of the things that was hailed as the catalyst of that was protests outside the presidential office for the first time in 3 years, which was significant, and they were large and mostly made up of young people. So that's obviously not great. But actually, there were like three quite significant warning signs, which I think are potentially quite revealing about the state of Ukraine's domestic politics. One was that actually, reportedly, and actually some diplomat colleagues of mine have confirmed that actually it was just like a phone call from the U.S. ambassador saying like, "What are you doing?" Like, so actually, it was like sort of very much like the Americans saying like,
Yeah.
excuse me, like, don't do that, like, do the other thing, which, I mean, I hate to sort of, to play into that Russian narrative that Zelensky is a puppet, but I mean, it cannot be denied that Zelensky is under enormous, the US and the EU have enormous influence on the government of Ukraine. The second thing that was really significant was that actually the Parliament voted they were by 100% to do Zelensky's bidding. So, I mean, a parliament that votes unanimously is not generally acknowledged to be the sign of a healthy democracy. And thirdly, and perhaps most worryingly, a lot of the debate in the original, a lot of the comments in the original debate were fiercely anti-Western. And that's really interesting. So, for instance, Yulia Tymoshenko, former prime minister, who was in prison for corruption by Yanukovych. Tymoshenko, like the orange goddess of the 2000, the original 2004 Maidan revolution, she stood up in parliament and said, "We have to take these agencies, these anti-corruption agencies, under control because they're the instruments of American colonial
Right.
control over our sovereign, beautiful, independent Ukraine." Now, that's Yulia Tymoshenko. She is like not a nationalist wingnut. She really isn't. But that's a really interesting, that has a really interesting resonance to a classic Kremlin narrative, and one that actually Putin referenced, which was, we are brotherly peoples. It was the nasty meddling American imperialists that caused this war between us. So actually, like, sort of strangely enough, you actually hear that being repeated by senior Ukrainian politicians. But to answer your question about where this leaves Zelensky, what we're dealing with is a sort of political quagmire of absolutely sort of epic proportions, with certain political death at every step of the way. So actually, I mean, there is an argument for saying that Zelensky's job, if he's an honorable man and cares about the future of Ukraine, is actually just to sort of soak up the flag and take all of the extraordinary sort of tsunami of opprobrium onto himself, and then just sort of, fall on his sword and just allow himself to to be annihilated politically, but then leave Ukraine with some kind of workable, peaceful solution. So that's the problem is external pressure, and that is from Putin, because I think Putin actually will be pressuring for pushing for regime change, which means elections. and which are long overdue because Zelensky is now 6.5 years into a 5-year term.
Okay, Owen, my final question for you is on Europe and the future of Europe. Big question to end on. And those extraordinary scenes in Washington, D.C., I wonder if they're as symbolic as I think they are, where you have the leaders of Europe kind of sitting around looking wide-eyed at Trump, paying him compliments, which they don't always do. And you've already mentioned that Europe has kind of given a lot of money to Russia through its buying its gas, and for all its talk of sanctions, has ended up funding the Russian state. What is Europe's role now going forward? What is its relationship with America? Do you think it's had its knuckles wrapped through this experience? Has Trump reasserted American authority over Europe, or is he cutting Europe loose? What do you think is the transatlantic relationship off the back of the Ukraine war?
Well, I don't think that actually Trump really cares very much about Europe, to be honest. I don't think it's really a gigantic part of his worldview. What he cares about and what he keeps saying is that he wants to deliver the best results for America and doesn't
Yeah.
really care who gets hurt in that process. He doesn't really need allies, and he's not Bill Clinton. He's not some sort of ecumenical sort of bridge builder to teach the world to sing. He doesn't care about that at all. He doesn't care about international the international order. He apparently cares much more about being transactional, and that's and as JD Vance has actually articulated much more explicitly, if Europe, if Europe cares so much about Ukraine, then please let Europe pay for it, because the United States is just out of that business. Sorry, we're just that is now your problem. We're handing it over. It's your baby, and to that extent, I think that there was an extraordinary. There's a very strong symbolism to that. I would argue that perhaps the symbolism of NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte literally describing Trump as daddy was an even more significant moment in the abasement of Europe. But actually, the bottom line is that actually Europe may be rich, but it's broke, which is a paradoxical thing to say. But I mean, the way those two things are simultaneously true is called debt. So all of Europe is, especially Britain, is literally heading towards a terrifying debt crisis, and arguably so is America. But America at least still has the military power, and it has the reserve currency status, and it actually has a few crucial things that actually make it objectively powerful, more powerful than Europe and wealthier than Europe, and also crucially, politically, America speaks with one voice. Europe doesn't, and that's precisely why Trump has been able to take the lead with his negotiations with Putin. As for Europe itself, I suspect that there's actually going to be some very major debates within Europe between those countries that kind of refuse to accept that Ukraine. It's now time for Ukraine to wrap things up, and I'm talking about the Balts specifically, maybe the Poles. There's a reason why the Poles were not there and the Finns were. I think the Finns, ironically enough, have always been quite pragmatic. There's a few actually interesting hints by Alexander Stubb, who, by the way, is a champion cross-country skier. Did you know that? He's literally for the Olympic level cross-country Finnish skier. Yeah, he's a very cool guy. Alexander Stubb, Finnish Prime Minister. So Alexander Stubb sort of hinted that that Finland has got some lessons for Ukraine, which I think caused a few brows to furrow, because if we're talking about the actual lessons of Finland to Ukraine, that would be defeating your much stronger enemy in a war, which the Finns did, then ally with the Nazis for 3 years, and then lose that war, and then accept Finlandization, which is sort of a kind of subordinate neutrality. So I think Ukrainian neutrality is not maybe the worst thing in the world. I don't think that's a disaster for humanity or for geopolitics. It's a formula for Ukraine remaining democratic and free, even if it's not a member of international organizations such as NATO. I don't think that's the worst possible outcome. and it's not equivalent. Finlandization is not the equivalent to total subordination. But anyway, those are all debates for the future. And there are debates that are going to be very painful, and they're going to involve lots of accusations of betrayal of Ukraine. But ultimately, I think Europe doesn't have the stomach or the capacity to actually stand by its words, its brave words of support for Ukraine. Because actually, ultimately, if I were Ukrainian, I would be extraordinarily angry at the Europeans, because what they've done is they've actually sort of been lying to themselves and to the Ukrainians about the extent of their support. As much as it takes, for as long as it takes, didn't happen. Didn't happen. And because Europeans actually, preferred to talk the talk rather than walk the walk, as we've already discussed. So going forward, if and when this process comes unstuck, I don't think that Europe does have an appetite for funding the war, for being the sole people standing behind a continued Ukrainian war effort. So ironically, Europe is actually going to find itself, in fact, I think, backing the same kind of ugly compromises that Trump is backing for all of their idealistic aspirations.
Owen, thank you very much.